Welcome back, everybody. Now that you know about the general anatomy of the circulatory system, I want to cover three more subjects today. The first is the path of blood through the heart. The second is the heartbeat cycle. And finally, the third is the diseases of the circulatory system, particularly the heart. So let's get started. First, I want to review the general model of circulation of the blood. In both systemic and pulmonary circulation, blood flows as follows. It starts in the heart and it flows into an artery and then into ever smaller arteries, finally into an arteriole, into the capillary bed, and then to a venule, the teeny veins, then into veins, bigger and bigger veins, back to the heart. Now what we want to do is look at the path of blood when it gets back to the heart so you can complete the cycle here. Two large veins return blood to the heart. They're known as the superior and the inferior vena cava. And there is a single large artery that takes oxygenated blood away from the heart. That's called the aorta. To understand blood flow through the heart, we need to first look at heart anatomy. So here's a picture of the heart. There are four chambers you can see. 1, 2, 3, and 4. The upper chambers on each side are the atria, the right atrium and the left atrium. The lower chambers are the ventricles, the right ventricle and the left ventricle. Blood from the right side goes to the lungs via the pulmonary artery, and here it is. And you can see that the blood in the pulmonary artery is depicted as blue because it has not yet been oxygenated. And this is an example of an artery that carries deoxygenated blood. So from the right side of the heart, from the right ventricle, blood is carried by the pulmonary artery off to the lungs. Blood returns from the lungs in the pulmonary vein, and this is an example of a vein that carries oxygenated blood. Let's look at that entire flow. Blood low in oxygen comes to the heart in the vena cava, the superior one above and the inferior vena cava from the lower part of the body. Dumps blood into the right atrium of the heart. Blood gets pumped into the right ventricle when the right atrium contracts. It is then pumped into the pulmonary artery when the right ventricle contracts. At the lung, blood drops off carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen. From the lung, the blood completes the first loop back to the heart via the pulmonary veins. So here are the pulmonary veins. Here are the two pulmonary veins coming from the left lungs and the two pulmonary veins from the right lungs, and they're going to dump blood into the left atrium. When blood enters the left atrium, it will get pumped to the left ventricle when the left atrium contracts. From the left ventricle, it'll get pumped into the aorta when the left ventricle contracts. So you should memorize that blood flow through the heart. There are also 4 valves in the heart, 2 on each side. So let's take a look at that. Here you can see one valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and there's also a valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle. These have names. This is the tricuspid. This is the mitral valve. You don't need to know the names of these valves. Then there is also a valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, and also between the left ventricle and the aorta. They're respectively called the pulmonic valve and the aortic valve. You don't need to know that either. These valves prevent the backflow of blood when the heart muscles contract. And therefore, they are very important, and it is very important that they close properly. The sound of the heartbeat is the sound of the valves snapping shut. The first sound, which is often referred to as lub, happens when the ventricles contract because the valves between the atria and the ventricles snap shut. Now I want to show you this on a diagram. The first sound happens when the ventricles on each side contract, forcing blood this way, and these two valves snap shut right here, the mitral and the tricuspid valves. That's the first sound. The second sound, what's often referred to as the dub, occurs when the heart relaxes and the valves on the outflow side of the ventricles snap shut. So let's look at that. Blood has been pumped into the pulmonary artery and the aorta, and now the entire heart relaxes. The pulmonic valve and the aortic valve snap shut because this blood here is under high pressure in both of these arteries, in the pulmonary artery and the aorta. And so the backflow snaps those valves shut. The heartbeat cycle can be thought of as follows. The right atrium and left atrium contract, and there is silence. Then the right ventricle and left ventricle contract, and we hear the first sound, the lub, as these valves between the atria and the ventricles snap shut. Then the entire heart relaxes, and the valves to the arteries snap shut. So now you should understand the heartbeat cycle. The final thing I want to talk to you about is the pathologies that occur in the heart, many of which you've heard of. So there are at least 6 ways to categorize heart disease. First, there's blood vessel disease. The blood vessels that actually serve the heart itself become clogged. This is usually because of a process called atherosclerosis, and this will be an important thing for you to understand. Second, there are heart rhythm problems. The heartbeat may be too fast, it may be too slow, or it may be irregular. Third, there can be defects in the heart that you are born with. These are called congenital defects. Fourth, there can be heart valve disease. The valves themselves can become diseased and prevent backflow, at least partially, and that becomes a problem. Fifth, there is heart muscle disease. The muscles of the heart can become damaged or diseased. And finally, there is infection of the heart by pathogens, meaning bacteria, parasites, or viruses. And if you all have owned dogs, you've probably heard of heartworm, which is a parasite of the heart. Let's look at some of the most common human diseases. So the first, and probably most important, is called coronary artery disease, or CAD. And this occurs when there is a buildup of plaque on the inside walls of the arteries, and that causes them to become narrower and less flexible. This process is called atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. And the plaque itself is composed of fat, cholesterol, and other molecules. It's different than dental plaque, but similar in that it builds up on the surfaces, in this case, the inside surface of the arteries of the heart. And plaque can build up all over the arteries of the body. One of the big problems that coronary artery disease causes is high blood pressure, because when the arteries are less flexible, the pressure from the heartbeat is transmitted all the way to the capillary beds instead of the arteries expanding and reducing that blood pressure. Heart attack occurs when the plaque buildup in coronary arteries stops blood flow, and as a result, some of the heart cells die. If only a few of the heart cells die, or if the block is only temporary, then it may be a mild heart attack. But if a major portion of the heart dies, the heart may be unable to continue to function, causing the death of the human. Another heart condition is called angina. That is chest pain, and it is usually caused by coronary artery disease, and your heart is actually not getting enough oxygen and therefore is starting to feel the lack of oxygen that you experience as chest pain. High blood pressure, this is caused by the narrowing of arteries due to atherosclerosis, as I explained earlier. And high blood pressure damages capillary networks, especially those in places like the kidneys and the lungs. Heart failure occurs when the heart doesn't pump enough blood as is required by the body. And you can imagine that if the heart is not pumping enough blood, the body is going to respond by increasing the heart rate. A stroke occurs when a piece of plaque breaks off and clogs capillary networks in the brain. In addition, plaque itself can just cause the spontaneous clotting of blood inside an artery, and that can result in the blockage of an artery and therefore a stroke. So that's it for today. Let's look at what we've reviewed in the entire circulatory system. The circulatory system is responsible for transporting materials to and from the cells, and these materials include oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrient molecules, or the building block molecules, hormones, which we haven't talked about but are chemical messengers made by the body, and we should also mention waste products. In addition, the circulatory system is the place where material exchange occurs in the capillary networks, and therefore materials can be exchanged between the bloodstream and the cells. All cells are serviced by capillary networks. The small intestine and the lungs provide the inputs to the circulatory system, and the kidneys and the lungs handle the outputs, or the waste, and remove those things from the circulatory system. The circulatory system moves by pressure created by the heart, The heart has two sides. The right pumps blood to the lungs, while the left pumps blood through the body. So you have quite a bit to understand today. After you've studied for a little while longer, go outside, take a look at nature, ask biological questions, bring them back to class, and I'll see you soon.